Welcome to Games Growth with Upptic. This week on the podcast, we have Spidey from BharatGG. We have a really interesting conversation about a wide range of topics. We talked about India as a market overall, how mobile has evolved there, how esports has evolved there, how PC and console gaming has evolved there. And then, of course, we dug into Web3 and what are some unique challenges for the Web3 ecosystem in India, what the unique perspective that Spidey is taking on addressing this market with his guild, and a handful of other really interesting localization and internationalization topics overall. So this guy impressed me. I didn't know him at all. I know you know him well. Solid interview. What do you think, Warren?
Yeah, a lot of our listeners probably will not recognize our guest for a couple reasons. So A, he's focused and from India, which I think is an underrepresented gaming market as far as, industry style content like we produce here on the podcast. But also because he's 19. He's the young king, the young hustler. And Spidey, he approached me, at a conference we were both at a couple of years ago now. And just as a young kid who's putting in the work to come up in the games marketing ecosystem, super smart guy. I've been really impressed. And, we share knowledge a lot about our different areas of work. And we thought it was really cool to get someone who is in the trenches doing a lot of localized games marketing work across mediums in India and really challenge some of our preconceptions and some of the industry's preconceptions and stereotypes about the Indian market.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, when you said you wanted to have a 19-year-old kid on the podcast, I was skeptical at first, but I was definitely impressed with his knowledge of the games ecosystem overall, and especially the methodologies and nuances of the Indian ecosystem, which is something I'm always very curious about and know almost nothing about. So if you're at all interested in any of these topics, it's definitely worth a full listen.
Yeah, very unique episode today, and we think it's going to be high value for you guys. So enjoy. Welcome, everybody. We have an interesting episode today. This is a topic that I've been excited to dig into for a while. We have our friend Spidey joining today. Spidey is the founder of two businesses, Spidey's agency, as well as BharatGG, which is a gaming guild based out of India. And the topic we wanted to dig into today was one that I don't hear discussed enough, which is basically the importance and unique aspects of India as a market in gaming. I think this should be an interesting discussion today because we're going to share both some of our team's experience and some of Spidey's deep knowledge on that market, maybe challenge some misconceptions about the market, and talk about the opportunities in India. So Spidey, welcome to the show. Why don't you just tell the team a little bit more, for those not familiar with you, a little bit more about your background and how you came into working in gaming and what you do today?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. I've watched some of the past podcasts and it is really good to be here on. And now just a little about me. So I'm 19 right now. I have been born a gamer, playing Counter-Strike. I'll just go back a little bit. So my father used to have an office and there we used to have computers for the employees. And I used to go every weekend just to the office to just play games. So it's born gamer, something like that. Then when COVID hit, I got a laptop because it was mandatory. And that's when I started to play more PC games frequently and I started to live stream. So I did part-time live streaming for a year. And I was one of the biggest creators for Minecraft Bedwars in India. And that's how I got into professional content creation or gaming. And then eventually I got some sponsorships, which were into Web3. I got to know about Web3. I started a marketing agency. I got some gaming clients. And that's how I got an idea that India is still very underexposed to Web3 games. And there is still a huge market to capture for. And I started the gaming guild called BharatGG just 6 months ago now. So that would be a little background.
Great. And you shared a little bit about BharatGG, and I think we'll dig more into that as we move forward on the episode. But can you also just share a little bit about your agency business, what type of work you focus on with that, and kind of where your focus is with the agency in the gaming space?
Yes, sure. So specifically, the agency specializes in NFT launches. And we have worked with around 7 gaming projects so far, whom we help launch their NFT collections, mainly on Ethereum. Now, IMX is coming up, so there are more projects coming on IMX. But the agency specializes in NFT strategy and collaborations, and that's what we have been focusing on.
Cool. I want to do that table setting. I think as we have the conversation today, we're going to talk a little bit about different segments of gaming, about PC, about mobile, about Web3. So I think everyone understanding your background is helpful for that. So maybe to start, let's talk about some of the misconceptions potentially and stereotypes of India as a gaming market. I've worked on a lot of game launches over the years, and one thing I find in general is a lot of people write off the India gaming market, qualifying it as like a low value market. The users there don't really spend money, so it shouldn't be part or a meaningful part of the launch plan. I'd love your personal opinion on that, maybe both historically and what you see in the space right now. And then we can maybe also share some learnings on our team side.
Yes. So I wouldn't completely reject that opinion, but it has changed a lot post-COVID or from COVID. Because if I just want to talk about some numbers, then now companies are launching games just for India. Example is Crafted. They knew how big the market is. They especially made a full team, a full database, a full game for India called BGMI. So it's exact replica of PUBG, but just for India. Then Free Fire also is making a Free Fire India. And these companies like BGMI, after launching, they got around $100 million revenue. Now, if we want to compare it with developed nations, of course, it might not be a lot. But if we want to talk about Indian ecosystem and just compare the data from past 5 years, then that is a big growth. And also some of the big giants, especially in the mobile sector, making games just specifically for India proves that there is users who are spending. There is a market which is still untapped in overall sense, because as you said, it's still underrated.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I mean, one of the big narratives overall for India is just the number of people who have come online over the last 5 years, right? It's like one of the fastest growing markets in terms of new internet users overall. So obviously this is a very insurgent segment overall.
Yeah, and just to share a few things that our team has learned working on launches and how India factors in. The first one, Xander already mentioned, which is it's probably the quickest growing or one of the quickest growing large markets. It also seems like very up and coming as far as like the trends we see for monetization in the sector. And then the last thing I really want to call out, and I'm curious, Spidey, if you would agree with this, we see a really big difference in performance on iOS and Android. And I'll share kind of my assumption of why that is. iOS, in the US, we see relative parity in monetization of iOS and Android users. iOS is a little bit higher. But my assumption in India is because, especially internationally, there's a lot more affordable Android devices that aren't as popular in the US, whereas like iPhones always have a fairly high price floor. There's only like so cheap that iPhones get. So in countries where there's more disparate wealth, like that there's larger gap between the highest income and lowest income segment, this is my thesis on why we see a bigger gap in monetization performance between iOS and Android in India. Do you think that thesis is correct, or any insights on your side and why we might see much bigger differences in performance on iOS and Android on the mobile side in India?
Yes. So just to give some context, so the cheapest mobile, which is available from Samsung, like it would be the biggest company worldwide, is $90. You can get an Android phone, which is quite good, for $90. And now if you just want to talk about Apple's starting price, even if you want to talk about 2 or 3 generations like iPhone 12 or 13, it is starting somewhere around $600, $700. And in India, the price of Apple phones is comparatively like 30% more than US prices. So that's the reason, like the answer is right here. You can buy an Android phone for $80 and the bare minimum to get an iPhone is around $500. So anyone who is buying an iPhone has a lot of surplus income. That's why you are seeing more revenue, a way more percentage of monetization from iOS users compared to Android.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear what you see as someone living out there. And as you stated, yeah, it seems very obvious. So what is the gaming market like in India? So if you could talk a little bit, Spidey, about just current trends that you see with gamers in India and psychology of gamers in India and general demographics. I know it's kind of a broad question, but when we think about gaming in India today and in 2024, what does that sector look like? You know, is it a good mix of men and women? Does it skew younger? Is it changing rapidly? How would you describe at a high level the current cross-section of gamers in India?
Yeah, so I'll start with the most trending thing which is happening would be esports. Because if you want to talk about the overall market, like of esports, it is dying. But in India, it's growing at the fastest pace post-COVID or from the COVID. Next, if I want to come to demographics, then the opinion I have is that males under the age of 30 are predominantly gamers, and then females above the age of, let's say, 35 or 40 are gamers. Because in India, we have a lot more housewives compared to anywhere in the world, and they don't have anything to do. So casual gaming is very big in India for this female population, which is not young, but which is towards the 35, 40 plus range. And because, as you said yourself, that a lot more people have come on internet. Before in India, only men used to have a mobile phone. Now, this is, of course, like a decade or two, but still now almost every woman also have a smartphone. So that's the thing. 30 below is a lot male oriented, where a lot of boys are playing it. They are also spending. Then it's like 35, 40 plus female casual gaming who don't spend at all. That's how it looks in terms of demographic. And then if I want to talk about mobile, PC, console, in that terms, mobile is of course the biggest. The growth in that sector is also the biggest because more and more users are buying better phones. More and more users are getting more money to spend, which wasn't the case 5 years ago. Then in terms of console, I don't see that there is a very big growth in terms of console because every game which is available on console is available on PC. And Indian mindset is that it is very value oriented. So people who have very excessive money, they might buy a console. But if I want to talk about a normal Indian who even is like middle class, they'll just buy a PC and play those same games on PC itself rather than buying a console just to play games. So console, in my opinion, won't have a very big percentage of growth year on year, but PC and mobile will definitely have a very good growth rate. Now, this is pre-COVID and post-COVID. At the time of COVID, everything was at the boom and the peak in terms of growth and everything, but that would be like overall state in terms of Indian gaming. Esports is the trending one. Then demographics is like 30 below, then 40 plus female. And in terms of the growth rate, mobile will always be the fastest growing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that insight around 35 plus female is super, super interesting. It's not one that I've heard a lot discussed largely. We see that cohort does very well in the United States as well and globally as well. But it makes sense that you have this whole cohort of housewives that over-index compared to the rest of the world.